Hey friends, Peter Fasciano here. Welcome back to the channel. Today's video is all about building these guys right here, a sound panel. 16.5 by 48.5 by 3 inches thick. On the back side, we have a French cleat and a bumper on the bottom. So let's go ahead and get into building this. All right, so pictured at the table are all the supplies or materials that I used at some point during my construction of these panels. You could probably get away with not using all of these things. I just found them useful. I had them, so I went ahead and used them. I'm going to go ahead and put a list of everything that I used in the description below, but the only two things that are not shown are the OBS that I had Lowe's cut into 3-inch strips from a 4x8 by 3/4 inch piece of OBS. And that, I believe, will get you 9 panels, including the French cleats and all of the scraps that you're gonna use for the bumpers at the bottom. So let me go ahead and clear off the table and start building the panels. To start the frame, measure out and cut your OSB strips to length. For one frame, you're going to need 2 47-inch strips, 2 16.5-inch strips, 2 at 15, and 2 at 8.25 inches. This 8.25 inch strip is going to be your French cleat, and you're going to have to cut a 45-degree angle into both boards. And don't worry, if you can't make that 45-degree cut in the boards, you can just purchase French cleat hardware at a hardware store and mount it directly to the board. The construction of the frame is straightforward and reasonably easy to assemble. First, take one of your 16.5-inch pieces and make a mark 3/8 of an inch in from both sides. And draw your line at this mark. Next, mark 3/4 inches in on both sides of the line. This is where you're going to drill your countersunk pilot hole so you don't split the OBS. Now, drill your holes and repeat this step with your other 16.5-inch piece. Once the holes are all drilled, go ahead and place a 16.5-inch piece and a 47-inch piece at a 90-degree angle to one another. I used a framing square to help me out with this, but you can use whatever you want. A squared up piece of scrap screwed to the tabletop will help, but I didn't have the ability to do that, so I'm using the framing square. When placing the pieces together, make sure that the 47-inch piece is underneath the 16.5. That way you're going to achieve the proper dimensions. Once squared up, drill into the 47-inch piece through the existing pilot holes in your 16.5-inch piece. This is going to remove enough material from the 47-inch piece so it doesn't split. Then insert your screws and tighten them up, but don't over-tighten them with the drill. You can potentially strip the hole or snap the screw heads off. I've elected to use a Phillips head to snug everything up for a good fit. Now all you have to do is repeat the same step for the other 3 sides. With the frame constructed, you can move on to the supports. Take one of your 15-inch pieces and insert it into the frame. If you made your measurements correctly, this should be a pretty good fit. Level it to the sides and the bottom of the frame. Make sure it's flush. Now, make a mark 2.25 inches down from the top of the panel on both sides. Once that's done, measure in 4 inches from both sides of the panel and make a mark. This is going to help you locate the position of the pilot holes on the side of the frame. Beneath each mark on the outside of the frame, go ahead and measure down 3/8 of an inch and draw another mark. This is where you're going to drill your pilot holes. Once all the marks are made, go ahead and drill. Just make sure the board doesn't move while you're doing the drilling. I drilled and screwed one spot before moving on to the other boards just to hold the board in place. With the support complete on one side of the panel, repeat this step for the other support on the other side of the panel. And then we're ready to move on to insulation and fabric. For the back of the panel, roll out the weed barrier and place the frame in the center with the supports you just installed against the table. If you cut the weed barrier to about 60 inches or 5 feet, this is going to give you enough material to pull it up and over the sides. Don't go any shorter than 60 inches. Otherwise, you run the risk of not having enough material to staple. To secure the fabric, start on one side and just pull the fabric up and over and place one staple into the center of the support. Pull the fabric snug from the opposite side and place one staple into the center of that board. You'll see the wrinkles go away. From here, just repeat that step on the other 2 sides and make sure that you pull the fabric to get rid of the wrinkles and snug it up to fit. Again, you'll see the fabric tighten up and the wrinkles will go away. With the initial 4 staples in place, now just work your way around the panel, pulling the fabric tight, and just use a lot of staples. But be patient. Don't rush this process. You don't want to have the wrinkles show up on the side of the panels when you put your final fabric over it. So take your time and do a good job. All right, so now it's on to the corners. Corners can be tricky. I decided to use this method, but you can look online on other ways to do corners, but this worked best for me. Simply lift up on both sides, roll the fabric in until you create a triangle on both sides. Fold one side over, place one staple in it, maintaining the triangle on the other side. Fold it over to the opposite side and place two staples to secure it. If you like the way this looks, go ahead and do it to the other three sides. From here, just trim up the fabric around the frame, and then you're ready to drop in the installation. Once you have the fabric trimmed and the corners cleaned up, you can prep the installation. Prior to handling the Roxul or the Rockwool, it's strongly encouraged to put on a mask, gloves, and long sleeve shirt to prevent any potential irritation. To help trim the installation, use an extra piece of the OSB and place it on top of the installation as a cutting guide. Once in place, cut down the length of the board about 3/4 of an inch deep, then cut underneath the installation to remove the material. This cut is necessary to account for the space within the panel taken up by the 15-inch support. Once the material has been removed, you're ready to place it into the frame. With the cut side down, simply fit it into the frame, making sure all sides are even with the frame and all the insulation is cleaned off of the fabric. Now you can move on to the final step of securing the decorative fabric to the panel. The process of installing the decorative fabric is the same as the weed barrier. A word of caution before you start. Depending on how long the fabric was sitting on the shelf before you purchased it, it might need to be ironed before installing it. To start, place your 60-inch piece of fabric on the table. Center your frame on the fabric with the insulation side down. Check to make sure you have enough fabric on both sides of the frame before you start stapling. Lift your fabric up and over and place your first staple on the frame. Now, just repeat the process you followed when stapling the weed barrier. Just to make sure everything looks good, stop after you place your fourth staple on the frame, lift up the panel, and check the front of it to make sure that the fabric looks good enough to continue stapling it. If you're satisfied with the way it looks, then you're free to start stapling the rest of the fabric. Since this is your final product and everybody's going to see this side of the frame, keep checking the front of the panel to make sure that all the wrinkles are pulled tight and have disappeared. Once all your sides have been stapled, now it's time to work on the corners. Again, take your time on this because this is your final product. This will be visible. Once finished, now it's time to move on to the final steps, installing the French cleat, the spacer, the bumper, and mounting the panel on the wall. To attach the French cleat, start by making a center mark at 8 1/4 inches on the back of the panel at the top. Then, make a center mark at 4 1/8 inch on one of your cleats at the top opposite your 45-degree angle cut. Next, make a mark 3/8 of an inch in on both sides of the cleat and draw your lines. Measure down 1 1/2 inches from the top and make a mark on each line. Now drill your pilot holes. Line up your center marks and make sure the cleat's flush with the top of the panel. Drill through your pilot holes in the back of the panel, holding the cleat in place so it doesn't move. Insert your screws and snug it up with the Phillips. Now, put the second pleat into position and measure from the top of the cleat to the bottom of the one that you just inserted. Make note of this measurement. You're going to need this when you mount the panel on the wall. And finally, place your spacer at the bottom of the panel towards the middle. This doesn't need to be exact, just get it close. Drill your hole, tighten your screws, and cover the screw head up with a bumper to protect the wall. Now you just need to mount the panel to the wall, and I can stop doing this voiceover. All right, so we're in the final steps. I've decided to mount my panels directly in the middle of the wall. So I'm about 23.5 inches down. I have about a 2-inch gap in between each panel. So I've drawn my line straight across the wall, should be even, and I've marked the very middle portion of where the panel is going to be. Now, if you remember while I was outside, the French cleat is going to be measured 5 1/4 inches down. So I'm going to go ahead and make my mark 5 1/2 inches down. Sorry, 5 1/4 inches down from that line. Once I have that mark, I'm going to go ahead and take my level and draw my line. So once everything is marked, you got your line drawn, you're going to go ahead and put your cleat up there. Kind of get it into this center, line it up from the line underneath. Go ahead and drill into the wall. I have that marked. Now I'm going to swap out and do my 1/4 of an inch bit for the anchors. Awesome, that's good. I hit a stud. No stud there. So I'm just going to put the anchor on this side. Swap out bits. I'm going to start the screws just so I have them poking out just a little bit. So the right cleat is going to go directly into a stud. I just lucked out there. This one will not. So I'll go ahead and line that up in there and go ahead and tighten it down. And again, just like everything else, you don't have to over tighten them. Looks like they're pretty good. Take the panel. Now you have room to work side to side, so if it's not up there exactly perfect, you can just measure it. Looks pretty good. 2 inches. Perfect. Now with that being hung, I have my back wall to finish, and I've got 22 panels up in the room. So we'll go ahead and do a final sound test once I get those done. Stay tuned.